Well, hey everybody, this is Jackson Mumey at Celebration Bar Review. And for those of you that don't know me, I've been preparing students to take their bar exams for nearly 25 years now, all around the country, and we've had great success. And in today's Facebook Live video, which we will also make a podcast, I'm going to be talking about just a quick, right off the presses, less than a few days after the bar exam, July 2016 bar exam recap. What I want to do is just kind of give you a sense of what we heard back from students, what we discovered, what people said was going on. This is the unfiltered version. There's still a lot of information to come in, but I know there's always a lot of interest in what's been on the exam in various states, the reaction to it. And so with the caveat that some of this information probably will change as we go forward and as we hear from more students and as I get more feedback. And we'll definitely share that with you in the podcast and Facebook Live. But I wanted to just take a few minutes and go through the exams. Let me first of all say to those of you that took the July 2016 exam, congratulations. Yay, it's done, you're done. And I'm thrilled if you're watching or listening today. I know many of you are on vacation and having a life and trying to reacquaint yourselves with your family and your pets and your friends and your bosses. And that's a good thing. I'm glad for all of that. But for those who kind of like to think about what was in the exam, what I want to do is go through some major jurisdictions. We'll look at Florida, California, Texas, New York, which is the UBE, and talk about those exams just to give kind of a quick overview of each of them. And as we go over the next few months, we'll have more details, and we'll obviously talk about each one in more depth by itself later. First of all, let me say with respect to the multi-state bar exam, so the test that was given on Wednesday, I did not hear anything unusual. There were no disasters that I'm aware of, no crisis. And it kind of follows a trend that I've seen over the last few exams. Ever since the introduction of federal civil procedure as the seventh subject in the multi-state, I've seen more and more, I think just a general flow from students. The exam seems to work pretty well. I think the trade-off of getting those 27 or 28 civil procedure questions and taking 6 or 7 questions out of the other 6 topics really worked well for people and really felt like that was a good trade-off. Civil procedure in and of itself did not seem to create a massive problem or difficulty for anyone, at least as far as feedback goes. Now I know there's the usual, oh my God, there were a million mortgage questions, except there weren't. And so that's, I'm glad that some of you think that that's what is on the exam, but in truth, nothing changed. And in talking to the national conference, nothing changed there as well. So we'll see what the results look like on the exam, but the MBE day seemed to be pretty consistent. Nothing specific there that jumped out. And by the way, those of you that are joining me on Facebook Live, if you've got comments or questions, feel free to type them in. I hope I'll be able to see them. I'm trying a couple of different things today to be able to do that, and so I don't guarantee that I'll be able to see your notes or comments, but if you've got them, by all means, type them in, and I'll try and respond to them as we're talking. All right, well, let's dig in first to Florida and talk a little bit about what was going on in the Florida bar exam. This is one of the areas in which we've got a lot of students and we got a lot of feedback. The first thing I tell you about the Florida exam is that no matter how many times I say to my students that Florida multiple choice questions are awful, badly designed, poorly written, nearly incomprehensible, then we get the comments back and people go, oh my God, it was worse than I thought. Okay, agreed. They are terrible and horrible. What did they test on that multiple choice section? We had wills and administration of estates, evidence, and then Florida criminal law and civil procedure, or criminal procedure and civil procedure. So, no great surprise there in terms of topic areas. Wills has been a traditional Florida multiple choice topic. Evidence comes and goes, but on many exams it exists. And in crim and civ, that's a given all the time. One of the comments I'm getting is, you know, they were the duh kind of questions, lots of wills. Yeah, lots of wills, meaning that there were actually 30 questions in wills. It just feels like a lot. And I love the perception that students have. There are actually only 30 of each of these subjects, but people will say things like, there were like 1 million wills questions. No, there were 30. It just feels bad, and it feels like a lot. So definitely a challenge there. And the truth is, you really, even if you know the law perfectly, it's tough to get more than half of those questions correct. And so our suggestion to students was to not overstudy that session or that section. But I was really pleased that there was nothing totally crazy on that part of the exam. As for the essays themselves, this was interesting. I had said before the exam that I was concerned that the examiners might go anywhere in the world on this part of the test, given their history. And they actually were more restrained than I thought they'd be in some respects. One of the great things was that there were 3 essays. One of them was torts product liability, which is a pretty straightforward question. Another one was contracts, which also was a pretty straightforward question. Now, I like torts and contracts as essay questions because they're typical essay question topics. So that part was really good. I certainly had anticipated it might be worse than that. But then we had a federal con law question, and federal con law, you know, you got to wonder. For years and years and years, it was Florida con law only. Then in the last couple of exams, we had a little bit of maybe Florida, maybe federal con law. But this question, question number 2, it was federal legislation, and it had to do with support of school children. And wow, it was pretty crazy. Educational work and the president's options and the constitutionality of the law. This was straight up federal con law. So to me, clearly a trend, as some of you are saying, yeah, it's a trend. I definitely think that federal con law is a trend topic. So no doubt about that. And that was a challenging question, I think, for people, but I think our students did a pretty good job about that. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in question number 3, which was the question that we had about there's this a house and a general contractor puts in a power generator, and then there's all sorts of bad things that happen. The electricity goes out, and then there's an explosion and so on. Well, in that particular question, we've also got, in addition to the product liability, we've got an ethics part of the question. Again, I suggested to people that they write the ethics part first. It was a long question, and I got a lot of feedback from people that they were glad that they had written ethics first. They thought that that was pretty important for them to be able to deal with that. So that's what we saw in the essays. We'll see how the results come out, but they were long questions. I think they were relatively difficult, but they were straightforward, at least in torts and contracts, and so I was really pleased about that. Let me just circle back around a couple of other notes I got around the Florida multiple choice. I just want to say, in terms of subjects, in Florida procedure, one of the comments was it was not heavily tested in timelines, but it was heavily tested on discovery. I think that's probably pretty typical. In evidence, we had questions in hearsay. We had some learned treatise questions and some reputation opinion questions. And then in wills, we had adoption, we had homestead, which I thought was really interesting. As I said, homestead shows up in a lot of different places. So this was one of the places that we got it. Okay. So I'm just looking at questions that people gave me. Yeah, they're saying the ethics questions weren't so bad. That's good. Yeah, pretty good. Okay. So I think yeah. Most people seem to be following me. I'm thinking I'm on track with that. So, okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Results in Florida due September 19th. Most of you in Florida, I understand, went drinking after the exam, so there you go. No, I'm just teasing. I think we're going to see good results from Florida students. I'm really pleased that that exam did not go way out into the woods with things that were not ever tested on essays, and so I thought this was pretty manageable. So to me, that was all good stuff, and I was pleased to see that. So that's what I've got going in Florida. All right, let's jump. Let's see. How about New York? We've got some New Yorkers online watching with us. New York is now the UBE. And I got to tell you, one of the things that just terrifies me is that there were some New York people who I'm still not even sure up to like a week before the exam, still thought they were going to be tested on New York law. So, as you discovered, there was no New York law on the UBE. It actually was pretty straightforward, and I think many of you commented on that to me. You said, you know, they always ask about things like wills and trusts and corporation and family law and procedure. Yeah, which is why it was actually pretty easy for me to say what was going on. But here's what we saw. There were 5 essays, I think. Is that right? 6 essays. And we had agency partnerships was the first one. Then there was evidence, which was actually a pretty long question, apparently. It had a lot of hearsay exceptions. One person said they thought there were 5 different calls to the question. That's a lot for a 30-minute essay. So long question, I think relatively direct in each of those questions, but still a lot to deal with. There was a contracts question dealing with services contract, emphasizing assignment and delegation, which I got a lot of feedback. People said that was kind of a challenging question for them. Then there were secured transactions. You know, is that a surprise? Well, a little bit, I suppose, but still gets tested pretty frequently, so I don't think it should have been a shock to anyone. And then finally, civil procedure, which should have been absolutely no shock at all. This was jurisdiction question, federal question, so jurisdiction is a big part of that. And we've seen that pretty consistently on the UBE. Now, I think a lot of people that had taken the old New York bar exam found the UBE exam to be more manageable. Even with the 2 MPTs in the morning, it still seemed to be a more, I think it was a more concrete test, that you didn't have the New York multiple choice, you didn't have New York law, you didn't have as many subjects to prepare for. And so while agency partnerships might not have been the number one choice of people to study for, it wasn't off the wall by any means, nor was evidence or contracts. Secure transactions probably was the least likely of all the subjects. But, you know, I think that, yeah, and then there was a torts question. That was the last one, sorry. And that was strict product liability. So again, pretty straightforward on this exam. We'll talk about the MPTs in just a moment elsewhere, but I think that New York went pretty well, and that was most of the comments that I got from people. You know, not terribly surprising. So I think most people taking that test felt like, yeah, okay. Now, I know there were some crazy things happening if you happen to take the test in New York at the Javits Center. As usual, there was construction and craziness going on, and it was not the best administered test, I understand, around the country, but there you go. It wasn't as bad as DC, by the way. If you were in DC, they got started 3 hours late on the first day because they had a mix up with 7, count them, 7 students' tests, whether they were typing or handwriting. And then the second day, they had more problems. I mean, it's unbelievable. DC every time makes it just crazy, crazy. DC is a Uniform Bar Exam Administration, so of course that makes it even crazier when it's across the country. But you know, that's DC, they do it their own way. So we'll see more UBE. Coming next year, we've got New Jersey, we've got South Carolina. In 2018, we have Massachusetts. So, you know, get used to the UBE. I think it's definitely part of the world that we're living in. But I will say that overall, I thought that most people were pretty on top of the UBE exam in New York and seemed to be okay. I heard far less tragedy and horror from that than we usually do when it's just the pure New York. Now, as to when results will come out in New York, well, that's always a crapshoot. I would guess very late September, very early October. Even though it's UBE, should be easier and faster to score. We'll see what they do with it. Along those same lines, the New Jersey exam, no surprises there, 7 topics. The 7 multi-state topics are all tested in essays, and those results will come out shortly after the New York results come out. Didn't get any kind of feedback that makes me think anything special or unusual happened in New Jersey, but wave bye-bye to the New Jersey exam. It's gone now. It's the UBE after this. So, you know, we'll see what happens there. But, you know, 7 straightforward essays, 1 in each multi-state subject in New Jersey. So not a whole lot to say about that exam. Next, let's talk about Texas. Texas bar exam, again, is relatively straightforward. Not a lot of changes from test to test. There are 12, for those of you that don't know, there are 12 essays in Texas. They're given to you in pairs, and there's typically 2 questions in these groupings that they give you. That's why it's called a pair. Thank you, Jackson. But so let me just quickly talk through these, at least as I've heard about them up to this point. The first pairing is in the Uniform Commercial Code. One of the questions was Article 3, no surprise. The other was Article 9, a purchase money security interest. That would be pretty traditional, and I didn't get much feedback to make me think those were terribly difficult. The second pairing was in family law. And in family law, there was one question that was general family law, no big surprise. The other one, I think, had a little bit of a twist in that it was a divorce proceeding with child support, but also had kind of a context of a bankruptcy filing by a spouse. Now, bankruptcy is a broadly testable subject, although not the specifics. So you had to at least understand a little bit about the bankruptcy code, apparently, to answer that question. But did it merit a lot of time on all of that? Yeah, I don't think it took a lot more than that. Just getting a note that the results for Texas will be in November because everything is bigger in Texas. Yeah, I'm with you, Bernie. Everything is bigger in Texas, including the drama. The next grouping was property and oil and gas. And here we got one property question, one oil and gas question, which is fairly typical. The property question was a commercial lease, not a big surprise, not very difficult. The oil and gas question had to do with a lease termination of an uncapped well. So if you love oil and gas, I guess you just, you probably geeked out on that. The rest of the crowd probably just struggled through it as usual. Next grouping, a very typical grouping in partnerships. When we look at business entities, partnerships is where the examiners seem to want to be most of the time. They did that here. We had a general partnerships question, and then we had one that asked you to compare or evaluate an LLC versus an LLP, and that's a fairly narrow question, but I don't think it was terribly difficult. Then we had 2 wills questions. One had to do with the state administration. The other had to do with the distribution of the assets or the proceeds under the will. Again, pretty traditional, pretty standard, not a lot of surprises there. And then I would say, to me, the biggest surprise probably was the last section. This was the guardianship was one of the questions, and the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, so consumer law. And so consumer guardianship, it's hard to know with guardianship if it's going to be tested or not tested. It was tested here. The DTPA had to do with non-insurance. And so I think if there was anything that might have caused difficulty for people, it might be the fact that instead of having a trusts essay, we went guardianship in that grouping, and that we'll see what that does to the testing. So that's what we saw in the essays. As to the MPT in Texas, the MPT in Texas was interesting. There are 2 that are produced by the bar examiners. This is the only one that I know about at this moment. But Texas used a landlord-tenant dispute, and the landlord didn't make repairs on a rental, and the question asked is what remedies are available. There were some statutes in a couple of cases. Pretty straightforward. I don't think there was much there that was remarkable. I did not hear anything from our New York students about MPTs, which makes me think it wasn't particularly overwhelming to them. They would have had this one plus one other. So if any of you New Yorkers are there and you want to write and tell me about the MPT, I'm glad to hear about that. One of the interesting things in Texas, however, is that there's a portion of the test called procedure and evidence, and there were some curveballs here. In the civil procedure section, the instructions for the first time said apparently that you would be tested on federal and Texas civil procedure. FedCiv Pro is just making its way into everything, and so no doubt it's out there, and that was part of this. Now, you had studied federal civil procedure for the multistate, so it shouldn't have been a complete shock to people. There were some removal questions apparently in that section. Pretty straightforward, but I think that would have been a surprise, and so now we're going to start telling people to get ready for federal Civ Pro on the P&E. Criminal procedure, a lot of questions apparently repeating from exam to exam, and pretty straightforward all the way through that. So that's the Texas exam. Results again due in November because it'll take them so long to figure out all the wonderfulness that all of you did. So that's what I see in Texas. Let me see here as we're checking. I just want to make sure I'm getting the comments. Love all these comments that you guys are giving me. Thanks for all of these. Okay, sorry, get to see my finger while I'm scrolling down. Okay, now let's jump over to California. Of course, the Californians are just waking up this morning trying to figure out what the heck happened there. So what did go on in California? Well, the first day, I thought it was pretty straightforward in California in terms of the essays. There was a civil procedure essay. Again, this is the weird part. They talk about California civil procedure, but the questions are actually federal civil procedure. So we're seeing federal procedure across the country now. I mean, it's just really making its way. Now, I thought as a federal multi-state subject, it might be a less testable subject on the state side. That's not true. It seems to be going the opposite direction. So they had a civil procedure question in California. They also had a real property essay, my favorite. And then the third question on Tuesday was a contracts question having to do with mistake and reformation and anticipatory breach and impossibility of performance. So those are actually pretty straightforward, all three of those. So not too bad, I think, in that regard. On the third day of the test in California, again, pretty straightforward. I thought California was actually pretty fair and equitable in these questions. The first question of the day was constitutional law, federal con law, and this was procedural due process, states amendment or states immunity per the 11th Amendment. There may have been a standing problem if there was an injury in fact, or the causation of the injury, and there may have been a ripeness problem as well. So federal con law was the first essay. Second essay was community property. I truthfully hope that all of our students managed to avoid the template language of California is a community property state. Really, you didn't need to say that, they know that. But the question in community property was the characteristics of property on dissolution of marriage, payment of debt after separation. Pretty standard stuff in community property. Gotta love it when you see those questions. I think they're fairly easy. And then there was an ethics or professional responsibility question. We see that trend a lot in California. Had to do with conflicts of interest, the competence of the attorney, a duty to communicate with your client, duties of being a careful advocate. So ethics, very typical on that exam, showed up here as well. So really no curveballs to me on the essays in California. I was pleased about that. So, and not a lot of comment about it. I mean, California students just kind of put their heads down and did the work. So that was all good news, I thought, there. As far as the performance tests in California, let me see here. I think I've got some of this information. The performance test on Thursday was a memorandum to a partner, so it was an objective task to a legal audience, had to do with a bookkeeper and their legal position. They were involved in a labor dispute and questions regarding the client's rights and the viability of a class action or representative suit. Obviously, this takes place in a fictional jurisdiction, the jurisdiction of Columbia, but seemed to be, manageable from the feedback I got from people with respect to that. The performance test on the first day in California was a letter. It was a pretty simple, I got the feedback I got from people, it was writing a letter regarding a legal matter, and the assignment was simpler than most people felt that their practice had been, and so they were pretty happy with it. So again, not much reaction. California results will come out right before Thanksgiving, because why not? And always a lot of fun in California. But I thought that this test might have been a bit more straightforward than it's been in some other times, and so we'll see what happens as we get more feedback there. I've not gotten feedback from my Georgia students yet, so I can't tell you much about that exam. MPTs, essays. Generally, when I don't hear a lot, it means there wasn't anything particularly dramatic or traumatic, which I think is good news. But I'll update you as I get that feedback. So basically, the recap is this. Across the country, the tests seemed to settle down a little bit. It wasn't quite as dramatic and chaotic as it had been, I think, in February 2016, which is good news. There weren't as many surprises in terms of testable subjects that had not been tested before. I think that one of the things that really quieted down the anxiety level was the UBE, particularly in New York. It seemed to really help that we had these shorter, more focused essay questions. And I really thought we had a lot of folks taking that exam in New York, but we also had UBE students all across the country. I really generally heard from them only to say, I feel pretty good about it. Things seem to be going well. I thought everything was manageable, no great surprises. So I like it when I hear no great surprises. To me, that's probably the best that we can hope for. And that seems to be the basic results or feedback that I'm getting from people at this point. So I hope that's helpful to you all. I just want to check and make sure I'm not missing any comments from anybody else. But I want to say that if you took the exam in July 2016, one of the questions that's probably on your mind is, what do I do now? And the answer to that is nothing. You don't do anything. Put it away, set it aside, go live your life, go back to work, go spend time with your family, go do the things, take a vacation, get really back to level equilibrium, get your rest, your sleep, all of those things. When results come out, we will assume, certainly if you're in our course, we'll assume that they're favorable, but if for some reason they're not, there's enough time to do the work. And I just want to assure people, sometimes I get this question, should I be studying between now and the release of results? My answer to that is no. It doesn't really produce much in the way of improved learning or benefits or studying. It's really more important that you get yourself back emotionally and physically. There's enough time to study if you need it, but I think that it's really not helpful to keep studying during this period of time. And I know some people feel like, oh, I just really need that. But really, you'll be just as well off to walk away from it for a while. We can bring you back up to speed, certainly in our course. It doesn't take very long to get you back into the flow of things if it becomes necessary. So my strong suggestion is don't try to study while you're waiting for the results. You're just going to make yourself and everybody around you crazy. And there's enough crazy in the world, clearly, right now that we don't need to add to it. So I hope that helps. For those of you that are in our course, I invite you to schedule a post-exam conference with me. I call it a post-mortem. Glad to do that with you. If you're not in our course and you feel like you need to do a post-mortem, talk to somebody that actually cares and talk about the exam and then get it out and be done with it. And that's really the point about all of this, is just get it out. Cleanse your system, do like a 3-day green smoothie cleanse of the bar exam, and then move on. And when results start to come out, we'll start to focus on that. Now, over the next few weeks, as I get more feedback and I'm able to see more questions and look at it, I will do specific episodes, both in Facebook Live and on podcasts, about the particular exams. But I just wanted to give you the quick update of what we saw just a few days after the tests had finished up. Again, congratulations to all of you that took the test. For those of you that are taking the test in 2017, I can tell you that there's nothing here that makes me think, oh my gosh, you should be afraid. They're all tough tests. There were no gimmies anywhere in the country as far as I know, but they're all manageable. And as far as I know, all of our students are still standing, even the ones that were out drinking tequila after the exam. I'm not mentioning names, those of you in Florida particularly. But I think that for almost everyone, it was an opportunity to really demonstrate what they knew and to demonstrate the skills that they had. And I'm really proud of all of you that made that effort. So been great talking to you today. I wish everybody the very best. If you were a July 2016 bar exam taker, go enjoy your time away from the bar. If you're a 2017 bar taker, stay tuned. We're going to have lots of information coming for you over the next few weeks about the upcoming exams, changes and things that are happening, new information, and certainly feedback on these prior exams. But for everybody else, been great to see you, and we wish you well, and we'll talk to you soon. Hope to see you soon on the pass list.